Do you frequently struggle with getting the hand in rehearsals or concerts from your conductor? Maybe you feel like you've put in all the work in the practice room, you've done your fundamentals, you've worked on making your soft dynamics softer. Maybe you've even sized up your mouthpiece from a 7C to a 3C to supposedly sound better or warmer or darker or whatever adjective you want to put to it. And maybe you're still getting the dreaded hand. What next? If you truly think you've exhausted all your options, we're going to talk about some mouthpieces today on the channel that might actually steer you in the right direction and stop you from getting the accursed hand quite so much. Let's get started. Hey y'all, I wanted to do a quick little video for the channel today highlighting these three mouthpieces from my vast collection. And this video will hopefully serve as A, a fun little show and tell and history lesson, and B, a nice little primer for those who are a little bit less experienced with Bach mouthpieces in finding a mouthpiece that might help guide them towards the sound they've been looking for. So without further ado, here we are today looking at the 3B, 7B, and 10B from Vincent Bach's lineup. If you are new to the wide world of mouthpieces and such terms as backbore taper, cup shape, and inner diameter sound like witchcraft to you, then I strongly suggest checking out the video that is currently in the top right corner of the screen in the card. It will go into all of these factors and many more in much more depth than what we can cover today in this video, as I am hoping to keep this one a little bit more brief. What I've got in my hands here is a Bach 3B. You may be familiar with the Bach 3C. It is a very popular mouthpiece among middle and high school students, and even beyond. Plenty of players still do use the trusty 3C. And we're going to talk about how the 3B would differ from the 3C. You'll notice the letter difference, B versus C, and that refers to the depth of the cup here, essentially how much of my fingernail is still visible when I touch bottom in the mouthpiece. The B cup is deeper than the C cup, and we'll talk about the specifics of that a little bit later on, but the crux of it is that there is more volume of air inside the bowl section of the 3B than of the 3C. A similar thing is true, although it's not demarcated, of the backbore section of the 3B versus the 3C. Backbores are not easy to see. They're not usually marked in any way, at least on Bach's mouthpieces, unless you get a custom one with a special backbore. But every C-cup mouthpiece coming straight out of the factory stock with no modifications has what is called the number 10 backbore. The backbore is able to dictate a lot of things, but the number 10 really just puts you in the middle of the compass and lets you do whatever you choose with it, whereas the B cup is stocked with a wider tapering number 7 backbore, which the Bach mouthpiece manual describes as darker and a Schmidt style, which is to say it is more geared towards the orchestral or classical side of things. So we can assume that it sounds, a little bit softer, a little bit broader in nature, rather than a laser sharp cone of sound going straight forward. It creates a slightly wider cone of sound and projects more out to the sides and is less in your face. So that is the case for both, like I said, the cup section and the backbore section of a Bach B cup as compared to a Bach C cup. Generally, what you're getting is a slightly deeper, richer, softer sound that spreads out more so than punching through. Not every numerical size in Bach's lineup is guaranteed to have a B size. For instance, there is no 2B or 1 1/4 B, but there are a lot of B cups in Bach's lineup for all of the core sizes like 1B, 1.5 B, 3B, 5B, 7B, 10.5 B. For most of the core sizes, you can find a B cup that is slightly deeper than its respective C cup. And we're going to talk about the three that I have here today in a little bit more depth. This next section is less of a surface level overview for those inexperienced with mouthpieces and more of a really nerdy deep dive, so you can use the chapters feature below. So I have with me here my three show and tell candidates, and we'll start on the larger end where, like I said, we have a Bach 3B. And this is not just any 3B, it's a fairly uncommon one from a short period in Bach's history, from 1997 to 2003. Some of you Bach enthusiasts in the audience may already know what I'm talking about. This is the famed large font or large letter period. It's a brief period in Bach's relatively recent history where they were messing with computer engraving and using this really distinctive font. I tend to really like mouthpieces that come from this period. This one's a little bit subpar, it's got some chips on the rim, and the backbore is a little bit out of round. And especially because of the latter, I don't think it responds quite as well as a new mouthpiece would. But in general, the large letter pieces are famed for quite a big sound. Next up, we've got our 7B from the Corporation Mount Vernon, New York period. Bach started his factory in the Bronx in New York and eventually relocated to Mount Vernon, New York in around 1953, where the factory stayed until 1965. This mouthpiece is on the tail end of Mount Vernon production, I believe, because it does not have dots after Corp, Mount, or Vernon, or NY for that matter. There are no dots after these, and I believe that type of engraving indicates about 1960 to 1965. The Mount Vernon period is when many enthusiasts consider Bach to have really hit their stride with mass mouthpiece manufacturing. They were handmade at this time, and on a lot of Mount Vernon Bachs, you can actually see some of the handiwork in the cup, and these hand-cut cups are highly coveted by players. The Mount Vernon mouthpieces fetch a pretty penny in many cases. This one was cheap solely because of the fact of it not being in very good condition, but also the 7B is one of the more common sizes. What's really tough to find from the Mount Vernon period is anything larger than a size 6 or 7. Mount Vernon 3Cs and 1Cs and 1.5Cs, those fetch hundreds of dollars a piece if they're in good condition, and I am completely priced out of the market, unfortunately. But I think the handiwork in the cup, as well as the fact that the brass probably contained more lead around this time, does tend to give Mount Vernon pieces a slightly extra dark sound, so we really have quite the chocolatey sounding mouthpiece here. And then finally, we have this interesting Bach 10B. This one is once again from the large letter period, and it is gold plated, but it has seen quite a hard life. It's got, a lot of missing plating in a couple of locations. Thankfully, the rim and cup are totally fine. This mouthpiece also just sold on my eBay, which is really the reason that I'm making this video. I wanted to show these B cups off together before I ship out this 10B. What's nice about our three candidates today is that inner diameter notwithstanding, these three share more or less identical cup geometry. Their cups are all a little bit deeper than the benchmark C and a little bit more funnel-shaped in nature. There's less of a defined sort of roundness at the bottom of the cup and more of a gradual listing into the throat of the mouthpiece and more of a V shape than the U shape that typically is associated with the C cups in Bach's line. But that being said, of course the inner diameter does play quite a role. For instance, the 3B has quite a round rim which already accentuates the width of the inner diameter and makes it feel a little bit wider than a flat rim would. And the inner diameter beyond that, for whatever reason, is a little bit wider typically on a 3B than on a 3C, but the inner diameter does of course make a difference. For instance, the 3B's inner diameter, partly just being wider and also being paired with quite a round rim that accentuates the width of the inner diameter, feels pretty hefty. The 7B, on the other hand, does feel a little bit cramped. The rim still has some decent roundness to it, but we are dealing with a smaller inner diameter. And meanwhile, the 10 rim is probably the flattest of the bunch. It still has some roundness to it, don't get me wrong, but it is a little bit flatter in shape overall than the other two rims, and the inner diameter is just a hair smaller. The question also arises of just how much deeper is a B cup than its respective C cup, and in most cases the difference is fairly slight. For both the 7B and the 10B as compared to the 7C and the 10C, there is just that little bit of extra room at the bottom of the cup. It almost looks like they took the original U-shaped cup and just made a little funnel at the bottom of the cup and made it go into the throat a little bit slower, and that's kind of how you end up with the B cup shape. With the 3B, we're kind of throwing a little bit of a wrinkle into the mix because the 3C is an abnormal C cup. And this is where I get my grievances with band directors saying, oh, well, once you've played for a few years, you move from your 7C to a 3C. You want to know why that's a grievance of mine? Because the 3C's C cup is actually a little bit shallower than most of the other C cups in Bach's lineup. And so the bitter irony of the fact that you're supposedly sizing up from a 7C to a 3C is your cup is actually getting shallower and giving you a little bit of a brighter, more pointed sound. And for some, that ends up being what they need, but for some others, that, like I said, might result in the hand. And that is why I want to bring awareness to these B cups, because if you are the victim, so to speak, of having sized up onto a shallower cup and now you're getting hassled to play with a softer sound, this is a really good first thing to try, just to give you a sanity check and see what it's like to have a mouthpiece that more easily produces a softer, darker, fluffier sort of tone. And now I want to do some demos for you and talk about some uses for the B cup that put it to its fullest advantage. The first thing I want to touch on is classical music and separate settings that can make the B cup advantageous. Firstly, in an orchestra, you might find that the B cup has a little bit of a freer blow since there's more room carved out at the bottom of the cup. There's a little bit less resistance, there's a little bit less pushback for you as you play. On the other end of the scale, if you're playing with a small classical group or maybe in a solo setting or have a lot of really intimate sounding passages in the classical repertoire to play, then the B cup might also be advantageous there, again since it's more predisposed to a softer sound and one that spreads rather than cuts. A lot of the solo literature that aren't just the core trumpet concertos like the Haydn and the Hummel and so on, might actually have been written for cornet, depending on their country of origin, the date they were written, etc. Particularly in the period between the late 1800s and the early 1900s, before the trumpet kind of ousted the cornet on the popular stage here in America, a lot of the solo literature that is now played on trumpet was actually written for and intended to be played on the cornet. The differences between the two I will highlight in more detail in this video up in the top right corner, but the essential part to know is that the cornet tended to sound a little bit softer and daintier and more fluid between the notes than what we know the trumpet to sound like. Again, we often associate the trumpet with that very direct cone of sound, and the cornet was more of this spread sound. And of course, like we've mentioned, that is what the B cup is good for. So I think when you play on a B cup, you're starting to cross between what is a traditional trumpet cup and what would be a traditional cornet cup. Granted, I play on stuff that's much deeper than a Bach B cup on cornet, but a Bach B cup is a great place to start if you want to explore a little bit of, again, a softer, daintier, warmer, fluffier sort of sound for cornet literature, as I'll demonstrate here. Now, fans or frequent watchers of the channel might see my slow descent into being more and more of a jazz head, so I do want to touch on that because one of the best uses of the B cup, in my opinion, is in smaller jazz settings or combos where you tend to want to play on the softer, fluffier side of things. You might be playing a lot of ballads, or you might be playing, cocktail music at an event and you don't want to be drilling your sound through people's heads, especially if you're the only horn in the combo. You tend to want to lay back and blend a little bit more. And what is the B cup good for, if not that? The benchmark for soft, fluffy trumpet tone in many people's eyes is Chet Baker. And Chet Baker did in fact play on a Bach 6B for a certain period of his life, among other Bach C cups like a 6C and I think a 10.5C at some points. So let me be clear when I say the B cup is not what gave Chet his tone. Chet had his phenomenal tone on any instrument or mouthpiece he picked up, as far as I know. But if you're smart with how you approach it, you can sort of lean towards a more Chet-like tone by putting to use a B cup rather than a C cup or whatever else you happen to use. For instance, in jazz band, where you might desire a brighter sound, especially if you play lead. I also think some of these smaller diameter B cups, like this 10B here, are good if you want to harness a more vintage sound. I'm talking more, not necessarily turn of the century, but kind of golden age of swing. If you're playing some of those older ballads in the style of Harry James, while you might desire a brighter sound in some cases, you can put a slightly narrower B cup to good use. Of course, that's more subjective because Harry James himself had quite a bright tone, and he was playing a relatively shallow double cup mouthpiece, which is a topic well beyond the scope of this video. Maybe someday we'll talk about double cups on the channel, but that day is not today. But if you do want a slightly softer sound that is still kind of emblematic of the swing era, something like a 10B or a 10.5B, if that's a thing, can actually be quite useful. I do want to stress though that not every trumpet player is going to benefit from moving, say, from a Bach C cup to a Bach B cup. If what you do is mostly setting principal in a wind ensemble or orchestra, playing lead in a jazz band, or playing in a pit orchestra where you play a lot of really dexterous, high register, high endurance type of shows, typically you are not going to benefit from a B cup, and in fact it might detract a little bit from your lead tone or from your endurance in the upper register. It can be really taxing to play consistently in the upper register for long periods of time on a deeper cup. I certainly don't advocate going much deeper than a B cup for just about any trumpet player, unless A, you never need to go above high C and you're just doing small jazz gigs or just playing ballads or soft solos all day, or B, maybe you have some sort of medical anomaly or physical anomaly with the structure of your face where playing on shallower cups like the C or shallower than that is really prohibitive. That's the only case where I would really advise playing on a super deep mouthpiece all the time. I say that because as I've gotten older and my practice routine has been stretched thin a little bit due to just having a lot of responsibilities between work and school and whatnot, I don't find those deep cups to be as easy to play on as I found them to be in high school, and I find myself moving shallower for certain genres. For instance, I have with me just on hand this Lotus 1M2 that I use for a lot of my jazz playing. It is shallower than a Bach C. It is about a D on the Bach scale. It is quite a bit shallower than most anything I would have used in high school, and yet I find myself using it more and more. Now the funny thing is I have this weird blind spot where mouthpieces that are a C cup depth don't respond well for me. I typically play on stuff that's either quite a bit deeper or quite a bit shallower, but here I am with a mouthpiece that's quite a bit shallower than a C cup, and I find myself using it quite a lot. I think I would potentially even use this if I was sitting first in a wind ensemble that plays really taxing collegiate level rep. But I do really need to stress that even as the deep cup bonehead that I am and almost always have been, it's not always advisable to play on such a deep cup. And even just the B cup, which is in theory not much deeper than the C cup, can start to have pronounced effects in the wrong direction if it's not what you need as a player. But of course, being a deep cup bonehead, I've spent an awful lot of time playing on a variety of deep cups, and I think I have a decent amount of expertise in the area, so I do want to open the floor for a little bit more discussion in terms of other options besides the Bach B cup. What we mentioned about the Bach C cup was that it typically has this more bowl-like shape with a fairly defined bottom to the cup, and what happens when you turn it into a B cup is you funnel out a little bit of the metal at the bottom of the cup, and you end up with this sort of V shape here. The V shape doesn't always give me the sound, personally, that I look for. What you get with a funnel shape like this is you get, yes, a little bit more darkness, a little bit more breathiness, but it doesn't necessarily have the big, fat sound that I want. Sometimes I like a sound, sure, that is breathy and dark, but sometimes I not only want dark, I want big and fat and chunky. That's especially the kind of thing that I like to hear in an orchestra, personally speaking. And so, what I would want from that is I would want the depth of that deeper B cup, right? But I don't like this funnel shape, I want more of that bowl shape. I want to take the bowl essence of the C cup and just move it down. Just make it all deeper without just kind of making the cup come to a funnel shaped bottom. If that sounds like what you're looking for, where you should look is maybe not necessarily the B cup, although it's worth a try to see if it helps you out, but the no letter or the A cup. Bach's mouthpieces range from A to F, and A is the deepest and F is the shallowest. So we're now on the deepest end of the Bach scale. B is deep, A is even deeper. But the no letter in between A and B, I don't know why they notated it like that, but that's how it turned out to be. The no letter cup is something special. It typically takes the same depth, approximately speaking, of the B funnel, and it bowls it out into more of a U shape rather than a V shape, and you get more space at the bottom of the cup so that you have that big, fat, chunky sound while still being quite dark by virtue of being deeper. So like we mentioned, we have the 3C, we have the 3B, and we have the straight 3, which as far as I remember is nigh identical in terms of cup depth to the 3B, but it is quite a different cup shape. It is much more U-shaped and much less V-shaped or funnel-shaped than the 3B. I personally really prefer playing on a 3 over a 3B. I really like the effect of getting all that volume on the sides of the cup. That's what gives me the blow that I personally like. The A cups are very similar. The main thing they do is they add a little bit of volume, again, on the sides of the cup, which I like. Those might be worth a look, specifically if you're looking for a sound that retains darkness and fatness at the same time. That's not many people, I understand, but I kind of ventured down that rabbit hole back when I was in high school, and I can't fully pull myself out of it, even if I do use shallower cups in certain genres. Now, don't you worry, if you're wanting to learn more about the no letter or the A cups in Bach's lineup, we will be doing separate videos on each of those, and we will be going into just as exhausting levels of detail as we did here with B cups today. But I did feel that it was most appropriate to release the one on B cups first, because no letter and A cups are relatively fringe and there aren't a ton of people using them, whereas B cups, you'll find them out in the wild. There are plenty of people who play on 5Bs, 7Bs, such things as that. You'll find them, occasionally here or there. I think B cups are fairly common and fairly worthwhile to try for a good variety of players. We've talked about where they might be more useful and where they might be less useful. The truth of the matter is there's no way to know until you try. So see if there's any way you can find a way to try Bach B cups and Bach C cups back to back, whether that means borrowing mouthpieces from your private teacher or from your school or going down to a local music shop that stocks them if you happen to have one in your town. Just go out and try these mouthpieces. I think they're really worth it for a lot of players to try, even if you don't fully end up using one for all of your playing, which, as we've mentioned, may or may not be beneficial to you. It is useful to know what is out there, again, in the wild, wacky world of mouthpieces. There are more mouthpieces out there than any sane person knows what to do with, but I think the Bach B cup is a great starting point. Again, if you just find that you want a little bit of a softer sound, a little bit of an easier time playing softly, things like that, it's a great place to start. There are, of course, any number of other makers who make all manners of deep cups, from deep U shapes to deep V shapes and everything in between, and if I were to cover them all, we would be here all day. But a lot of people already play on Bach C cup mouthpieces, and so I think it's worth trying out a Bach B cup in a similar rim diameter, if at all possible, and seeing what that does to your playing. If it does something positive, great. You learn something, maybe even buy the mouthpiece and you use it for certain aspects of your playing. If you don't like it, well, you learn something there as well. Anyway, I think that's where we're going to call it on this video. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I really appreciate the support on the channel lately. You can find more mouthpiece videos in the playlist in the top right corner in the card. And until next time, we'll see you on the flip side. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you want to support the creation of bigger and better content on the Samuel Plays Brass channel, have your name featured right here, and a whole host of other perks and benefits, then please consider pledging your support at patreon.com/SamuelPlaysBrass. For now, you can find more videos in the end screen cards to my left.